Hello and welcome to this session on reimagining leadership in pediatrics. My name is Richard McGee and I'm a pediatric endocrinologist in Sydney, Australia. I'm joined with my co-chair for today's session, Dr. Vicky Timmis from the UK. And as we begin this session, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which I work, the Dharawal people. I recognise and respect their continuing connection to land, water and community. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. It is a pleasure to see so many of you here, eager to explore how we can enhance our leadership skills and contribute to the betterment of our field. As pediatricians, we are often called upon to lead, whether in our clinical practice, research endeavours, or educational roles. Effective leadership begins with an understanding and management of ourselves. By increasing our self-knowledge and emotional intelligence, we can better navigate our relationships and foster strong collaborative teams. And today, we will delve into the core aspects of leadership in pediatrics. We will discuss how developing insights into both group and individual behaviours can enhance our ability to influence a positive work culture. We will also explore performance management skills, which are crucial for fostering an environment where our teams can thrive and deliver the best care for our patients. Let us approach this session with an open mind and a willingness to learn from one another. Together, we can reimagine and reshape leadership in pediatrics to create a more supportive healthcare environment. If you haven't already at this point, I'd encourage you to visit the EPALA website. And EPALA has a mission of empowering pediatric leaders in global child health through education, research, and practice. We are on day 2 of the conference, the Wednesday, with the theme of managing self and others. We've already had day 1 on advocacy, and coming up this Friday, we have the theme of reimagining leadership, and I'd encourage you to attend if possible. For today's session, we have 2 halves. The first half, Dr. Robin Lawrence, Dr. Ruth Mitchell, and Professor Tina Tan will be speaking, and then we will have a 1-hour break, and then Professor Julie Uy and Dr. Sanjay Suri will be speaking. And I'd like to give a brief promo to the Friday session. We've got a range of wonderful speakers coming along. So again, if you've not registered for the Friday session, please do so. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker for this evening, Dr. Robin Lawrence, who is the Chief Executive of the Department for Health and Wellbeing. She is responsible to the Minister for Health and Wellbeing for the governance, leadership and management of the South Australian health system. This includes being the direct employer of more than 45,000 staff, managing a budget of 7.4 billion Australian dollars. Robin has more than 15 years' experience as a senior healthcare executive in predominantly change roles. She has led many transition projects, including capital developments and commissioning, cultural reform and governance changes. She led the Western Australia COVID-19 response as Deputy Chief Health Officer and Incident Controller, and has a medical background and a strong focus on clinical governance and excellence in her most recent roles as Assistant Director General with the Department of Health. So welcome, Robin, and thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks, Keenan, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon or this evening. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am working and where I am tonight, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders online with us today. So I was asked to give you a bit of an overview on my career journey in leadership and kind of a bit of a lessons learned and highs and lows. In doing this talk, and I've done one very similar recently, I titled it Journey to the Dark Side. And I think that's because my experience as a clinician, albeit a very junior one, I was a registrar when I made the move across, was that it was seen as a real negative to become an administration trainee, to the point where back in that day, we had a lovely junior doctor's common room and it was suggested that I probably shouldn't be allowed in there anymore. And so I took quite some time with my junior doctor colleagues to say, well, surely it's better to have someone on the inside rather than having everything done to us as clinicians by non-clinicians. I've traversed that journey and I have some knowledge of paediatrics, having been the chief executive of the Children's Hospital in Perth twice. And I did go into medicine to become a paediatrician, but clearly took a clear career diversion. My decision to move into a leadership role, and I guess in a formal way, recognising that actually we all do leadership in different ways in our roles, was based around some really annoying things that happened as a junior doctor. As an example, why we had to have a special roster for neurology and neurosurgery after hours in our hospital, despite the fact that was my first term and I knew nothing about either of those things. Yet when I'd done the term for 10 or 12 weeks, when I might have some knowledge, I couldn't be on the roster anymore. And those sorts of things just did not make an ounce of sense to me. At the time, people were very welcoming when I said, well, could I become a registrar in medical administration? And many of you may not know that there is a college for medical administrators and a fellowship program that sits alongside that. I'd have to say, though, over the time that I moved from being a trainee through to now, the career has not been limited. I've done lots of jobs and I've moved around a lot, but one of the big things I learned along that pathway is, for me in particular, and the evidence would say for most of us, it's very difficult to plan your career journey, and it's not linear. And there'll be times when it's appropriate for us to step into senior positions, time when it's appropriate to step sideways, and times when it's appropriate to go back to whatever suits us at that time. And that those factors that influence that are based around our personal side as much as anything as what's going on in our systems. So I think importantly for me, it is really important when, no matter where you are in your career, whether you're just starting out as a junior doctor or you're a very senior specialist, that you understand what your skill set is and when you perform at your best. Because that's what you want to be doing. That's what makes us happy and engaged and, I guess, fulfilled in the work we do. You learn these things as you go through your career, and I think it's much easier when you sit back at the tail end of your career to say, well, I understand that now. And when you're in the beginning part of your career, it's very difficult. I looked around at what has helped me through that time, and I'd have to say that one of the things that kind of was very striking was when I was looking at one of my young sons and he was doing something really annoying, and he was very dogmatic about it. And I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, that's one of my career traits, or one of my personal traits, which is a strength in many ways, but in him it was an unrefined, immature version of it. But it hit me so strongly in the face that you can see your own skills and competencies in different ways. And sometimes they're shown in the things that annoy us, and sometimes that does happen to be your child. So moving on from that, if you know yourself, you have to share yourself to be a good leader. I think very often people think of leaders as people who are sitting on a pedestal, they've got great knowledge, they've got all sorts of things, and none of that's actually true. Every leader is just a human being. And to be successful, I think you've got to start by being really true to yourself and being your authentic self, and sharing that with your team around you. Being honest and transparent is a secondary thing that comes with that. When I ask my teams, my extended teams and staff, what they like most about my newsletters, it's got nothing to do with the information that's in there. What they want to hear is what I've done on the weekend and where I visited and who I've seen. And to me, that doesn't sound interesting or exciting, but I think it's that personal connection that people can relate to you, that you are another human being with the same family problems that everybody else has got and the same issues that everybody else is facing. And it's much easier then to build relationships and to build that respect and trust that you need to be very successful, particularly as a leader. Listen, respond, and respect to what you hear. The further you go up the chain, the harder it is to hear the voices of the people you need to hear most. And often by the time they get to the most senior person in that chain of command, there's often a little volcano that's sitting underneath it. So I always encourage my more junior team to actually be really aware of that, because if it's getting to you, it means you need to listen. And you need to respect the views of those people coming forward to be able to provide the appropriate feedback or advice to enable them to do what they need to do, as well as to make decisions for the future, for the betterment of the team, and in our case, the betterment of our patients, because that's actually what we're here for. It doesn't matter where you are in an organisation, structure and health, it is about the patient. Empower those around you to participate and be the best they can. It's pretty clear that us as leaders don't do a lot of the doing. We are the conductors of the orchestra, and our teams need to understand what it is that we want them to do to be able to deliver. And that goes no matter where we are in the organisation and what our objectives are. If those around us know what the objectives are and where what I call the guardrails are, they can get on and do it. We're luckily in an industry that we're full of very, very smart and driven people. And all we need to do is provide the guidance to do that. We don't need to do it all ourselves. When you're on this leadership journey or any career journey, I think it's important to realise we're not there alone. We have a lot of people with us, both our colleagues, senior, junior, and friends in our workplaces that we've made along the way, but also our families. And we need to include them in the journey, understand the part that they're playing and the part that we're playing in their journey, because it's not just me alone who's there. And if there's parents online, you probably will understand this. Recall standing in my bedroom one morning, arguing with my husband nicely about who had the busiest day and who had the least important things that they could cancel. And he's a clinician, and he conceded and gave in and said he'd stay home with the sick child of the day on that occasion. And when I got to work, I thought, oh my goodness, what happened if that child actually was really sick? And we were worrying and arguing about work when actually our priority was our family. So as well as knowing your cheer squad, understanding your priorities and how you're going to work with them over time, because nothing runs to plan. There's always curveballs thrown at us, and we need to be able to adapt to those in a way that's right for us in the time. I think it's also important, if you're a working mum or dad, to understand the importance of your role in your life, because in fact, for many of us, that role is equally important. Not that we're going to give up our families for it, but that it keeps us alive. It gives us a degree of energy from being a career person, and how we work those things together is really important. I've been super lucky. I've had a really, really excellent husband who's shared the load with me. And we've structured into our lives how we have that time out. And one of the really most important lessons one of my senior colleagues gave to me when I was very junior, which has been invaluable, is there's a couple of things you can do on that. And the two that I put into place from that kind of lessons with him over a Friday night table was that I always managed, I would start early, my husband would do the morning shift with the children, and we'd be home together as much as we could for dinner. And we'd stop and we'd had dinner together as a family, kids would go to bed, and then we went back to what we were doing. And we've been able to work that through so that we could make that work. It doesn't work every night, and you can accept that. But that was the one thing we ensured we did. The second thing was time out, both time out for us as a family and how did we set our leave to enable that. And it took a lot of planning in advance with two professionals, and we all know the issues that there are in hospitals and clinical careers in getting leave. But it doesn't matter how short it is, having a plan and knowing that in this far away, 6 months, 12 months, I've got this coming, was really important for us, and it gave us time with our kids as well as with each other. But we also set time for time out for just the two of us. And we had a regular schedule of once a week where we had a confirmed babysitter, so that we knew it didn't matter if we went for a walk around the block or we went for dinner, we could get out and have some time together. And that enabled us to recharge. I think also personal time out is really important. For me, I've used walking as that. So I will exercise every day, whether it's just a simple walk around the block, it doesn't really matter. And that's my downtime, my thinking time. Moving on from that, I think there will be highs and lows in all of our careers, and it doesn't matter what career we're undertaking. But you learn a lot from both the highs, but also from the lows. And recognising that they're a normal part of our business is really important, because if you're like me, you take them all personally and you think, well, this is, I'm a failure, I haven't done a good enough job, I'm not going to live up to the expectation. It's really important to be able to move beyond that. It's okay to walk away and think that for a short time, but most of the time that is absolutely not true. We're all good at what we do. We might have not done the perfect answer there and then in that time, but there's inevitably something to be learned from it. And some of my most dark days have brought about some significant lessons. And, you know, if you make an error like that, you don't make it a second time. And I'm talking about management here. Clinical stuff is similar, but it's different. And I don't think we can compare the two. But, you know, if the roster got messed up today, that's not a great outcome, but it's also survivable and we can move on. So I think when you are having those lows, to be able to look and say, well, what do I take away from this? What am I learning? What am I going to pass on to my colleagues about this into the future? How will I mentor my junior staff? And one of the things that's been really important for me in that is I've had terrific mentors and I guess senior leaders that I've reported to over the time. And I've carried that with me, that no matter what, I will protect my juniors and those who work for me, because actually that's my responsibility to do that. And they might make a decision that I don't necessarily agree with. They might make an error of judgment, but actually I will take responsibility for that. It's my team and it's my responsibility to help them fix it and grow it. It's really important. You have to support those juniors around you. Otherwise, nobody wants to do the jobs that I do. And every job we've got is difficult to fill. But senior jobs are getting harder and harder. And if people like us don't step up, there isn't anybody else waiting in the wings. And we have some fantastic skills to bring to it, particularly clinical leaders. I see the clinical leader as the translator between people who want to stay purely in clinical service, but inevitably there's a lot of people in clinical management and leadership in hospitals and healthcare who don't have a clinical background, and they need a translator where that's the case. And so often if you're arguing around a budget position or those sorts of things, you need to bring that clinical view to the table. So clinical leaders are so important in growing our own, but also in providing that carry through to the non-clinical leaders in our healthcare settings. I want to just also touch on rewards, because rewards essentially, I think, are intrinsic. What makes most of us tick is success in what we do. And I've touched on the fact that I think our personal and professional lives are inextricably linked, and we need to feel successful in those both at the same time. And you can do both if you can get the balance right and work out at any point in time what that balance is for you, because it will change over time. I'm now at the end, my kids are older, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, what am I doing with my time? But back when they were younger, it was like, how do we fit everything in between sport and school and all of those other things and the pressures that come on? So be prepared to be, I guess, agile in that, and that's a term we use a lot, but I think it relates as much to those transition points as it does through our careers. Never forget your relationships. No matter what, it's always about the people. And in fact, the relationships are often what brings the greatest reward. When you have a success with your team, that is the best feeling. A personal and individual success makes you feel good. But, you know, the days when we've been able to open hospitals, I've been able to open hospitals and celebrate that with the whole team is phenomenal. And to share that emotion just heightens it. And I think that's very much what keeps us going. I always finish this talk, but probably not so relevant for this audience. But I do recommend to my other senior leaders who aren't clinicians on the floor that you've got to stay connected. It's really important. You've got to walk the floor. You've got to understand what's going on in your healthcare setting. And if you're a clinical leader who's got less clinical time in your diaries now, then definitely you still need to walk those corridors and be attached to your clinical colleagues as much as you need to the non-clinical colleagues. I've touched on growth and how much easier it is to see. I do want to leave a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm just going to wrap up now. But I think growth as we age is easier, and therefore having some shared experiences with people and mentors, whether they be formal or informal, with others who have walked the path ahead of you is important. Everything we do will provide us an influence, and it's really important to understand that and to take that on board, both the good and the bad. But I can't recommend enough a clinical leadership journey to clinicians. And I think it is so, so important to have clinical colleagues sitting with us at the table, to be keeping us true to the cause, which is about patients. But also it's possible to do it, and it's possible to do both. And it is possible that, and important that clinicians step into that void, because if they don't, somebody else will. And it's that journey that I started as a medical registrar moving to the dark side that really highlighted that. So thank you. It sounds like you've got a very busy and probably a bit more academic schedule, but hopefully I've given you some food for thought, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Robin. That was fantastic. I feel like we've got leadership advice and also got some life advice to tip in as well. So that was brilliant. Thank you. As mentioned, so we can have some question time now. There is actually a question function in the in a chat function at the top right hand side of the screen. You'll see a little box with a question mark, so you can type any questions that you have for Robin in there. Please use that. We do have a question now saying, so I appreciate your insights into being a woman in medicine. Do you think there is a way to achieve balance without having a supportive partner?
Well, look, I think there is. I think, you know, it's much more, I presume it's much more difficult with supports. And I look at even families who've come from overseas who don't have family supports, albeit all our family was working when we had our children. But I think it's about finding the balance that's right for you and how you can do it. And you should never think that no one else has done it before, or that you're the only person in that situation, or the only person who's, you know, child doesn't want to go to school today, or that you feel you're a bad mum or dad because, you know, they're saying that something terrible's happened. Everybody's going through it. And I think we're particularly, I'm not a man, so I guess I can't comment on men, but I think as women, we feel like we should be superhuman and we should keep all that bottled up. But once you start to open the bottle, you'll find that actually there's lots of people there to share with you. So I think anything's possible, but don't feel like you're alone.
Yeah, thank you. No more questions being written in the chat at the moment. So I just really liked what you were saying in terms of sharing a bit of yourself and being almost being a bit vulnerable, so that then you can develop those trusting relationships, and that's so important in building your team. So yeah, is that something you feel like you've developed yourself as you've gone through your journey?
I learnt that the hard way. So I had a period where I was very unwell. And when I was recovering and came back to work, people started to tell me all these things that people had said. You know, you were dying of this, and your marriage was breaking down, and a whole lot of everybody made up what they didn't know. And it was only, you know, nobody had asked me during the time. And at that point, whilst it's not actually anybody's business, it became really clear that being slightly more open with people was actually much more beneficial, because people making up these wild and wonderful stories was just useless. Whereas if we'd been a little bit more open in what was going on and that I was sick, I think it would have been very different. But at the time, it was just about soldiering on and pretending everything was okay, when clearly it wasn't. So again, you have to feel comfortable in that, but it's much, much easier for me to form a relationship with my colleagues, but also I've got, you know, my admin team and stuff who works with me. If they know that I'm not a scary person who comes to work in a suit and goes home in my, you know, whatever, I go home on the bus actually. But those relationships are so important to the success of my office that it just works better for me.
Great, thank you.
There are a couple of other questions in the chat which have come through, Vicky. And so I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to combine two which are fairly similar, if that's okay, Robin. The question is, what's your advice regarding finding a balance between clinical work and administration? Because, as you said, it's important to have clinical administrators, and this person really wants to stay connected and walk the floor, and therefore they're reluctant to go to administration, but really recognizing that it's the administration that can make those necessary changes. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, and I think everyone has to find their own balance on that. But I think the good thing is in most countries now, there is the opportunity for clinicians to do both. in reality. I mean, in my job, I can't, and I made that decision that I would switch across to full-time administration. But I think you, as a head of department, you've got a great opportunity to really stay connected and to lead your clinical team. And obviously in Australia, we have clinical directors, which tend to be more 50-50 now. So I think there's opportunities to find your space at whatever time that might be in your career to do bits. And you can move between both if you've kept up your clinical skills, which I haven't, even though I try to pretend sometimes. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but unfortunately your camera turned off. I'm not sure why.
All your cameras turned off too, but yours have come back. So look, I think from that perspective, there is now lots of opportunities for clinicians to do both, if that's what you want to do, and you can do it for a while and then go back. I don't think anybody should feel that you have to go down one path or another and be constrained to that. If we look at our children, they'll all do multiple careers. I think as doctors, we tend to have one medical career, but now there is flexibility in how we use our time.
Again, thank you so much to Dr. Robin Lawrence for her contributions and for going through those questions with us. We really appreciate your time and your input. Unfortunately, we don't have time for further questions at this point, but we will make a note of them to consider later on. And I'd like to move on to our next presenter this evening. I'm just going to reshare the presentation. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Ruth Mitchell, who is a pediatric and adult neurosurgeon and researcher based in Sydney, Australia. She is a passionate medical educator, a fellow of the Faculty of Surgical Trainers of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, and a member of the Advocacy Committee of the International Society of Pediatric Neurosurgery. Dr. Mitchell is also an international public speaker on peace, security, and equity, a leader in the anti-nuclear movement, and an advocate for diversity and inclusion in surgery and global access to surgical care. She is currently the first woman to chair the board of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. A Nobel Prize was awarded in 1985 and has provided leadership to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, and again, a Nobel Prize in 2017. And the picture you can see on the slide is actually Dr. Mitchell holding a Nobel Prize, and it's my first chance to speak to a Nobel Prize winner, so I'm very honored. Dr. Mitchell chairs the board of the Ubuntu Lab, an emerging museum of the humanities. She's been awarded an Australian Medical Association Doctor in Training of the Year, the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons John Corboy Medal, and the University Convocation Medal. So thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell, for joining this afternoon, and I'll pass over to you.
Sorry, Richard, can I just mention your slides just need to change? Oh yeah, there we go. It's okay. We were in just a presenter view, but that's fine. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Dr. Mitchell.
Oh, good. It's so nice to be here with you. What a treat. And what a wonderful message from Robin. She said so many wise things that I'm still thinking about. So I thought I would share a little bit about my journey and the things I've learned along the way that might be relevant to our leadership in pediatric spaces and on teams. And I really wanted to draw on this theme of managing yourself and managing others. As mentioned, I have a number of roles. My main clinical work is as a pediatric and adult neurosurgeon in Randwick. I'm passionate about epilepsy surgery and anything where I can look after a brain. And I really like children. I'll put up with the adults if I have to. Remembering that they were once children certainly helps in those moments. So what have I learned about leadership in these numerous different roles that I've had in the clinical and the leadership and advocacy spaces that I'm in? I think people often want to know a bit about how I've made it all work. And so I wanted to share kind of some of the insights and I guess life hacks and the stolen wisdom that has helped me cobble together a life which I find very interesting and certainly busy. I want to put a disclaimer out there that I don't feel as though I'm someone who has it all together. I'm not so much a person as maybe 3 gerbils in a trench coat most days, but you know, we make it work and that's what matters. So people always want to know, and particularly I find medical students want me to tell them what I know about, like, say, time management. And so what I've come to understand is that phrase and that framing kind of leaves me cold. And my much preferred option for how to think about this space is to think about energy management. And I stole this idea. This is not my authentic original idea. I got this from one of my former bosses and ongoing mentors, Professor Kate Drummond at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. And she really embodied this. And I realized as I watched the way she went about her very busy life that I really liked the way she thought about things. And in particular, this idea that, if we think about time as the important currency in our lives, it's a bit, there's never enough. But if we think about energy, then we understand what it means to do things that are sustainable and renewable in terms of our own personal mojo. And so for me, I find myself gravitating towards things that give me energy, and that means I can get more done. And so if you find that something is sapping your energy, or if someone is sapping your energy, then it's important that you appreciate that is information for you to use. And that has relevance for selection of clinical specialty, for what kind of practice environments you work in, but also what kind of roles you take on in other spheres as well. And I think particularly when you start to appreciate that being in leadership roles gives you energy, which it certainly does to me, then it helps to direct what you do with your spare time, which then rapidly evaporates. So then another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is people talk about work-life balance. And we've already had a bit of a question about balance. And there was a question about, can you have work-life balance if you don't have a supportive partner? And I think my life is an example of, well, absolutely yes. I completely forgot to get married. And so I have found that it's possible to have balance. But again, I've found a framing that I like more than that, which is the idea of work-life integration. And so for me in the last few years, it's been really important to get down to the nitty-gritty bottom of why is it that I do what I do, and to understand my why. And so if I have found my why with my clinical work and with my activist work, with my leadership roles, then the integration is so much easier because I can see that all the things that I'm doing hold together and they're part of a whole. And so one of the steps on this journey for me is that I actually found it really helpful to employ the services of a coach. And so I have a really great coach, Olivia. She's actually also a doctor, but she does a lot of coaching. And she's, on the internet, which is fantastic. She's based in Melbourne, but I've never met her in real life. And this is the marvel of, the modern era. Most of the time, it's a huge drag to have to be on Zoom all day, but sometimes it means you can access the expertise and the guidance of someone in a different state. And so I have found it really helpful in terms of defining my why and digging down into what is it that really matters to me and what is it that are my deepest yearnings and the most important things I think that I'm on the planet to do, to actually have someone help flesh that out for me. And that's helped me with all sorts of aspects of my life. It's helped me to make sense of, my fledgling private practice, which isn't something I thought I'd ever have, my public work, but also the way that I lead when I'm chairing a board, the way that I do public speaking. It all feels so much more grounded now. And it's about integration as we go forward. So I was thinking about this as I was, musing about what am I learning about leadership, about managing myself, knowing myself, managing others. And I've been thinking a bit about what does this mean when we come into a new team? And this is often something I find myself guiding my registrars through, because they're coming onto a new team. In the surgical specialties, we have pretty fast rotations through specialties. We're lucky if we have a registrar for a year. Most of the time, it's just 6 months. And you'll be familiar with having really rapid throughput of your juniors onto your teams. So how do we manage new teams, and how do we teach people good skills about teamwork? And the newest team that I've become a part of is actually a new board that I've taken on, which is the board of a fantastic organization called the Children First Foundation. And at the moment, my CEO is in Samoa, providing support to an initiative led by the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons to build capacity in pediatric surgery in Samoa. And so you see the wonderful outputs that are coming from this organization. But what is it that it means? What does it mean to like build the team that makes the magic happen? So it's been so wonderful to start by acknowledging the strengths that are already there. For example, a fantastic CEO who has a vision for industry-leading levels of compliance with child safeguarding, for example. And at the same time realizing, where are the areas where we need to grow? And then that can help us build a team that addresses the gaps we might have. It's both about inviting people to lean into aspects of themselves they may not have been felt welcome to bring to the table, but also sometimes you need someone else at the table. When you're starting out and you're trying to find your way, I often find it helpful to tell, for example, trainees who are wondering whether they should be on the council of the college or something. I like to say to them, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Now, for those of us who are already at the table, we have to think, who else is missing? And let's see what we can do to remove the obstacles for those that should be here with us. And once upon a time, I worked with a fellow who was kind of there's some cheeky people in neurosurgery, I'm sure you can imagine that. It's not too much of a stretch. Who one of his favorite cheeky criticisms, if something was done in a way that he didn't like, was to say, well, excellence is not for everyone. But I actually, and it was pretty funny at the time, it was to the professor, so it went down poorly in the moment, but it was funny later. But what I've actually realized is that when we build teams and we bring people into places and we ask people to come and sit at the table with us, it's actually an invitation to be excellent and to be part of excellence. And my most recent feeling about leadership is that it is an invitation to extend the idea that excellence is for everyone and you are welcome here and let's be excellent together. So I think what I wanted to talk about next is already actually been beautifully covered by Robin, but I want to say it again because I think it's so important. And that is that, you need to find out what you need to thrive. And that's really about being your truest self, your most authentic self. My most authentic self is my best gift to my patients, to my colleagues, to my community, to the organizations that I provide leadership to, and to the movements that I care for, particularly the movement to improve, access to surgical care in the world, the global surgery movement, and to the work to eliminate nuclear weapons. In those really important communities, we have to find our happy place. And in the clinical setting, we have to find our happy place. So not everyone has these kind of epiphanies, but I've been very fortunate to have a couple. And probably the most important one was the day that I realized I loved neurosurgery and I had to be a neurosurgeon. I was in the operating theater. I was looking at the cerebellum in a posterior fossa tumor resection as a medical student. And it was like kind of realizing you could be an astronaut. It was just so powerful and so profound. And similarly, I've had moments of insight in my leadership work outside of clinical spaces where I've realized I'm really in my best spot. And so that's what I would want for anyone who's trying to do good work, either clinically or in other spaces. Because the power of that is if you find the place that's your happy place, you find the niche where you're leaning into your most authentic best self, and it's having the best possible consequences for those around you. This is the magic quality. So now the great pleasure is to be able to be around when medical students, residents, and registrars are finding their own way and discovering, hey, you know what? I really enjoyed looking after that particular patient. You know what I've found? I thought I wanted to be a surgeon, but it turns out I just want to hold them together till morning. Maybe I should think about critical care, or whatever the epiphany might be. Getting to be witness to those moments is kind of only possible because I've been vulnerable to share my own journey and to say, hey, listen, this has been my journey. This was what it was like for me when the light went on. And it gives them permission to have those experiences too. And when they want to talk to someone, they know who to come to because they know who's up for that kind of chat. So why do we go to the trouble of thinking about teams and thinking about ourselves to this level, to this reflective level? Well, the reasons to build successful teams is because it's deeply worth it. One of the teams I get to be a part of at Sydney Children's Hospital is the epilepsy team. And so, it's a really good feeling to get to know well my neurology colleagues, my pediatric neurology colleagues, and the others who inform our decision making around who is going to benefit from an epilepsy surgery. Big deal thing, often a very destructive procedure, like a corpus callosotomy, for example. And there's a very extensive workup and a very long journey to take a family on to go down that path. But thinking about today, when I sat down with the epilepsy fellow to think through an audit carefully, I thought about what a great learning environment it is, not just for the fellow, but for me to be in a multidisciplinary team, which has this common shared goal of looking after really complex patients with difficult needs. And I'm learning something new every day. And I have a feeling, although I've got no data or evidence to back this up, I'm the N=1 in my little study. I have a feeling that being in these stimulating, diverse teams is actually something that can help to combat burnout. And it gives us a feeling of meaning and purpose and stimulation. And it allows us to use modes of our brain that maybe aren't part of our everyday work. And I think that really is important. And it's exactly the kind of environment I want to bring learners into who are, earlier on their journeys than I am, because I think for them it's such fertile learning ground. But more than anything, why do we build teams that are high performing and bringing out the best in everyone? Well, I think ultimately it's because our patients deserve it and our planet needs it. So whether it's the motley crew of rat bags that I work with to try and get rid of nuclear weapons through both the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and ICAN, which is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And let me tell you, it's a highly diverse crew. It's a broad church that do that work together. Or whether it's the clinical setting where I have to humble myself to be quiet and try to learn as much as I can about how an EEG is read, and how to learn how to adjust to the pace of decision making that the average epilepsy neurologist needs to make a decision. Newsflash, it's a different cadence than surgical decision making. All of those things are so worth it because look at the good we can do when we get it right. The sort of maybe second last thing that I wanted to say is when I'm thinking about teams and the medical students, residents, and registrars, and now fellows that trust me to help guide them, I find it really humbling. And I also think about the nursing team members who, I realize do rely on me to set the tone and set the pace in many of the environments I'm in. I'm really drawn to this quote about what I should be doing, and that is this: be who you needed when you were younger. I just love that. I find it so helpful. And finally, the last thought I want to leave you with is to think about the kind of impact that you want to have in the world. And just to give you an example of someone who I just think is fabulous, this quote is about Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton didn't spend her millions on space travel. She spent it putting 150 million books in the hands of children. Be like Dolly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's lots of applause coming in, Ruth. So that was wonderful. That was really inspiring. Thank you. So do please be typing in those questions. So our first question is that, so as juniors, some people feel that there's not often space at the table. And do you have any advice for people that aren't yet consultants about getting involved in leadership roles and getting their voice heard? I think particularly given often these people, as you mentioned, are quite transitory and you're moving around departments and often geographical locations as well. So often it feels quite difficult, even if you're keen to get involved. So do you have any advice for people still in training?
I think it's real that it's challenging. No question about it. But I would just encourage you, if you have that urge, that desire to be at those tables, just insist. Like, just pull up a chair, just put yourself down at those tables and insist on being counted. You know, you might feel a little resistance, but the reality is most people are not going to resist for long when they realize you're really keen. And when people are unsure as to what you might be doing there, your strongest position of advocacy, your strongest voice of advocacy is always from the bedside. So if you can refer things back to the fact that it is better for patient care to have junior doctors at this table so that we can really get it right from the whole team, that kind of framing is very hard for people to argue against. And so getting your framing right, and that goes back to getting that deep sense of what's my why? What is my big why? Why do I get out of bed in the middle of the night and go into the hospital? It's because of our love for the patient. It's because we care about our patients. And if we can frame things that way, it doesn't matter how senior or how important someone is, they know they're not right to push you away. So you know, you actually can claim some moral high ground. And the other thing I would say is to find like-minded people who might be in a different discipline or in a different hospital, but they're having the same challenges or battles. And you know, you find this little support group for yourself. And so, for example, I was a trainee, and I was, you know, really horrified by the fact that bullying and harassment seemed to be just absolutely endemic across our entire profession. And I found myself at the forefront of the, you know, work that the Trainee Association for the College of Surgeons was doing on this. And I did feel quite alone some of the time. And on Twitter, of all places, I found a really good friend who I'm still in touch with, like literally every day, who at the time was the president of the British Orthopaedic Trainees Association, Simon Fleming. And we were doing the same work in 2 different countries on the same issues. We were having the same stupid conversations with similar people and finding each other and having the support group. I mean, we were running like an, you know, we're like I explained it to my mom by saying, yeah, he's my pen pal, you know, for like 8 years before we met in real life. But that's super powerful. So find your people who might not be in the same room with you in person, but they're in the same room with you in spirit.
Yes, great advice. Thank you. One of the persons asked, how do we bridge the generational gap between juniors and seniors? As a leader of a training program, I find it difficult getting through to junior residents.
I think the hard part is that, like, the only real way through is just to listen. So to try and make the space safe enough that people can actually tell you what they're thinking, and what they're worried about. And I think it's only by really listening that we can build bridges. And so sometimes that means listening to like awful music, or you know, having to like humble yourself to go, oh, actually, I don't know how this bit works. I'm not up with these TikTok kids, or you know, whatever. Like there'll be important things that are really important to our juniors that maybe aren't on our radar. And so taking the time to actually listen, like I've never ever regretted buying the team a round of coffees. You know, no matter how little or long the time is that you have, you can actually find the mutual interest and find the places to connect. That's a real challenge. Like I had a conversation with 2 other surgeons in a big complex case today about exactly this, about the fact that expectations are changing, and that people about what the role work should play in your life are changing. And so it is a big gap, but I think we can get across it.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's about the end of our question time now, actually. But thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you, and I know people have been really enjoying it. So thank you so much, Ruth. That was fantastic. We will.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And we will keep track of any other questions that come in, just so we can follow up on them. So I think I'll hand over to Richard now. We're just going to introduce our third and last speaker for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you to Dr. Mitchell. So our third speaker for this session before the break is Professor Tina Tan, and I'll just share a slide. So Professor Tina Tan is the President-elect of Infectious Diseases Society of America. She's Professor of Pediatrics at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University. She's Medical Director of the International Patient and Destination Services Program, Medical Director of the International Adoptee Clinic, and Medical Co-Director of the Travel Medicine Clinic at the Anne and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, USA. Because of the time difference, Professor Tan was not able to join for the live event, but she has sent a pre-recorded presentation, which I will now share.
Well, hello, everyone. I am just honored to be able to speak to you for this meeting. My name is Dr. Tina Tan. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the Feinberg School of Medicine of Northwestern University. I'm a pediatric infectious disease specialist. I am medical director of the International Patient and Destination Services Program, as an president of the medical staff here at Anna Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. I'm also president-elect of the Infectious Diseases Society of America, and I'm co-chair of the steering committee of the Global Pertussis Initiative. And I first want to thank Dr. Kevin Forsythe for the absolute honor of being able to speak to you this morning. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about this morning is I'm going to talk to you about my leadership journey and about how important it is to advocate for children and why child health leadership is so important. And the one thing that I've learned from a number of my mentors is that it is very important to identify a mentor or a person that you consider a role model that will be able to support you in your leadership journey. The other thing that is really important is to take the opportunity to take opportunities that present to you. Even though you may not know whether or not you have done this before, or you know you've not done it before, it is really important to take these opportunities because you can learn so much from these opportunities. And one opportunity leads to a number of other opportunities. And many of these opportunities will lead to you being able to network with other people, as well as to learn leadership skills from other people. So, for example, the first leadership opportunity that presented itself to me was I was asked to be a question writer for the American Academy of Pediatrics prep board review course. And they wanted an infectious disease person to write questions. This is something I had never done before. And I really initially was not sure that I was going to be able to do this, but I was really encouraged by my mentors to take the opportunity and try this because it would be a good opportunity to meet other people and to really get an understanding of how questions for board review courses are written. So I took the opportunity, and it was a wonderful opportunity. And one thing that you should do whenever you take one of these opportunities is to show interest, to show passion, and to really ask questions if you're not sure how something should be done. And this was an incredible opportunity that has led to multiple opportunities, not only in the American Academy of Pediatrics, but also has led to opportunities with the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the Infectious Disease Society of America, as well as multiple speaking opportunities for multiple different meetings. So after I took that opportunity and did some question writing for the board review course for the American Academy of Pediatrics, they actually asked me to sit on the planning committee for the in-person board review course and to actually chair the planning committee for this course. This also led to me being asked to join the executive committee of the section on infectious diseases, which I ultimately ended up chairing for 4 years. And it also led to me being first a liaison to the Red Book Committee of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and then a voting member of the Red Book Committee. So you can see that one opportunity can lead to multiple other opportunities. And this is so important because with each of these opportunities, you should take the opportunity to advocate for children, because children are a population that cannot advocate for themselves. And there's so many important child health initiatives that really need our support in order for these initiatives to work. Now, my initial involvement in the American Academy of Pediatrics also led to my involvement in other societies, mainly the Pediatric Infectious Diseases Society and the Infectious Disease Society of America. And for both of these, I started out being a member of the program planning committee for the meetings that these different societies held, and ultimately ended up being chair of the program planning committee. And this led to me being nominated for the boards of both of these societies, which I have served on. And for the Infectious Disease Society of America, that first board service allowed me to advocate for issues that were related to children as well as to pregnant women, because many of these societies do not ultimately think about children and pregnant women when they're putting forth initiatives. So these are opportunities for us as pediatricians to really advocate for children and pregnant women. And this, in the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, it also led to me co-chairing the Inclusion, Diversity, Access, and Equity Committee. And the same is true for the Infectious Disease Society of America. And this ultimately led to me being nominated and elected to the presidential track for the Infectious Disease Society of America, for which I am currently president-elect. And I am so humbled by this opportunity, but it does give me the chance to advocate for issues that are specific for pediatricians and for children, as well as for pregnant women. So the takeaway points are that you really should take the chance to do things that are presented to you, even though you may not have done it before, or you don't think you're qualified for it, because these opportunities will lead to a host of other opportunities and will open doors to many different societies that you may not have thought you might get involved in. It also allows for great networking opportunity. And I can say that serving as first the North American representative to the steering committee for the Global Pertussis Initiative, and now co-chairing it with Dr. Forsythe, this has been an incredible networking opportunity where I have met so many wonderful people and have been able to work with these individuals on other projects outside of the Global Pertussis Initiative. So with each of these opportunities, please take it as a chance to learn something new that you can apply to other opportunities that present themselves to you. And one other thing to remember is really to stay true to yourself and be humble and ask questions, because you are bringing unique talents to each of these opportunities that you undertake. And this is something that is really so important to remember, because you really are part of the group or committee that you're asked to serve on, and you're able to show them your passion, your enthusiasm, and your interest in the topic that the committee or the organization stands for. And this is so important because it really shows your ability to advocate for a population that is unable to advocate for themselves. And that is why leadership in childhood organizations are so important. And the other thing that's really important is to really learn from each of these and take advantage of the networking opportunity that these different opportunities provide, so that you can meet different people from around the world and have the opportunity later on to maybe work on different projects with them. And I think that for me, my journey has been really very humbling, has been very, very educational, and I have enjoyed every single opportunity that I've undertaken, and I encourage you to do the same thing. And I thank you for listening to this, and I wish you all the best in your leadership journey. And I have faith that you all will be wonderful leaders and will be the next generation of leaders that advocate for childhood issues.
So I'd like to thank Professor Tina Tan for her presentation. And it now leads us into the break, which will go for just under an hour. And after the break, we have two fantastic presentations. So I'd encourage you to come back promptly in just under an hour's time for the next session. Thank you all so much for your input and contributions in this first half. I look forward to seeing you shortly. I'd like to welcome you all back to the second half of our Reimagining Pediatric Leadership webinar. And in this half, we've had a slight change to the schedule, and our first presenter is going to be Dr. Sanjay Suri, who I will now introduce. So Dr. Suri is a consultant pediatrician in child health with 23 years experience in a district general hospital in the UK. He has a total of 35 years experience as a qualified pediatrician. During his career, he worked in acute and community pediatrics and has expertise in pediatric neurodisability. Dr. Suri was the previous training program director at the School of Pediatrics in Yorkshire and Humber in the UK for over 10 years. He is a fully trained mindfulness teacher who qualified from the University of Bangor in Wales Centre for Mindfulness Research and Practice in 2022. Dr. Suri, thank you for presenting to us this evening, and we look forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction. And good evening, and whatever time zone you are in, whatever time it is, welcome to everyone. I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking Professor Forsyth and Professor McGee for inviting me and for, I suppose, believing in what I can offer. And I'd like to particularly thank Victoria Timmis for relentlessly pursuing me and finding me after I retired to come and take part in this fantastic kind of conference that you have put together. I'm really humbled and privileged to be part of a very illustrious group of panelists, and I'll hope you'll bear with me. So I'd like to start my session with simply inviting you to come into presence. And, for those of you who this doesn't work for, then you can just listen to my words. For others, you may wish to gently close your eyes and just draw all those strands of your scattered mind, and just bring them into this moment. And just coming into presence, arriving here fully in body, mind, and spirit. And just feeling that sense of connection between your body and the ground, just feeling your feet on the floor, that sense of being anchored to the land, to the ground, to the earth. We've been hearing about this earlier today as well, about how we actually do belong. We belong as human beings to this earth. So just inviting you to bring your attention to your hands on your lap, your body on the chair, and just coming into presence. So great. Welcome everyone. I'd like my next slide, please. So just a very quick interaction around how you're feeling right now. So you can use the thumbs up button or the thumbs down button. I'm afraid we don't have a neutral button. But it's great to see a lot of thumbs up already. And even though this is a webinar and I cannot see anybody's faces, I do have a real sense of presence that you are here, you're listening, and that we are all connected. We don't have to necessarily, speak to one another or be able to see one another, but there is a great sense of connection already. Next slide, please. So before I talk to you about this team member, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about my own journey. So as Richard has already pointed out, I'm a retired pediatrician, and I came to self-care and mindfulness mainly through the trainees that I looked after as a training program director. And in fact, there's a fantastic example of reverse mentoring when I was sitting with a trainee who was passionate about improving the morale of pediatric trainees in our region, who I said to that, I'm thinking about doing mindfulness teacher training, but I'm not very sure whether it's the right thing to do, especially towards the kind of end of my career when I feel that yes, I'm passionate about mindfulness, but really, do I want to be doing teacher training? And she said, absolutely, if you have that feeling that you should do it, then you should do it. And I must thank her for encouraging me to become a mindfulness teacher. So that's an amazing example of what we call reverse mentoring, but I just call it mentoring. So let's say there's a team member. And this team member is on the left-hand side, you can see they are ambitious, they are hopeful, high achieving, they feel they're accountable for what they do, they have a great sense of connection with the team, and they are a team player. And of course, they are a human being. They need to move, they need to eat, they need to sleep. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is perhaps what people don't notice about them or don't know about them when they come to work, that they are fearful, that they're vulnerable, insecure, often very self-critical, stressed, and burnt out. Now, imagine that this team member is actually you. This is not somebody separate from you. That you have all these traits in one person, causing a lot of conflict and causing a lot of difficulty for yourself. How would you help yourself? Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about looking after ourselves, understanding stress and burnout. We're going to talk about mindfulness, 5 ways to well-being, and I'll touch upon the aspects of leading others, though actually that is more part of Professor Julie's presentation. We'll talk a little bit about what are the key skills of leaders and what makes a good leader. So most of my talk is going to be around self-care and about mindfulness. Next slide, please. So why bother with all this? And for many decades, we didn't bother with all this. But we know that medicine and leadership are stressful. We know that doctors are burnt out. There are plenty of statistics to support this. The burnout rates in whichever country you look at the UK, Australia, Japan, the US. I think we're running at burnout rates of between 40 to 50%. So we need to perhaps understand some of the reasons for this burnout, but I think it's more important to recognize that there are things that we can do to help ourselves. We are not very good at seeking help. And the reason why we're not very good at seeking help is because we're not very good at acknowledging that we are stressed and that we are burnt out. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of letting the team down, which actually there's a contrary to it. It's contrary to what the reality is. We know that burnout affects patient care and it affects team dynamics. And there's plenty of research to support this. And patient satisfaction is linked to doctors' well-being. So if you really want to improve the patient satisfaction statistics in your organization or your hospital, perhaps the way to focus is to focus on the well-being of the staff, because you will automatically get better patient satisfaction and you'll get better retention of doctors. The good news is that you can help yourself and you can help others. Next slide, please. So what is burnout? I mean, we talk about burnout a lot nowadays. It's part of every questionnaire. The NHS staff survey has burnout in it. The GMC survey for trainees and trainers has burnout as a question. So burnout is a syndrome. It's a very specific syndrome of emotional exhaustion. So, physically you may not be exhausted, but emotionally you're drained. There's depersonalization. So you come to work and you separate yourself from the clients or the patients that you look after. And that's the only way you can carry on. The suffering that you see, the suffering that you experience yourself and your team members is just too much. And there's a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. Just click, please. There's a quotation that comes up next. Lovely. So Christina Maslach has done a lot of work. She's in fact pioneered the research on burnout in North America. And this is what she has had to say, which really stuck with me. What starts out as important, meaningful, and challenging work becomes unpleasant, unfulfilling, and meaningless. Energy turns into exhaustion, involvement turns into cynicism, and efficacy turns into ineffectiveness. And burnout is not necessarily something that happens to people kind of mid-career or late in their career. Burnout is happening to people as medical students. So, people are burning out very, very quickly. And this may not necessarily have to do with workload, though it's often to do with workload, but it's just a sense of, and we'll talk about that in a few slides, just a sense that, you just don't want to carry on. Next slide, please. So this word resilience gets a mixed press. People don't like it because it signifies that individuals need to become more resilient, and it probably relates back to our antiquated thinking about resilience as being stoic, as being solid, as being unemotional, unmoving, and that's not at all what's implied. In fact, the quotation suggests that the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. So we're not talking about the stoicism that comes with being an oak. The oak tree gets uprooted in storm, whereas the bamboo that can be more flexible in the wind will often survive. The other aspect to mention is that self-care is not mutually exclusive from systems change. If the system needs to change, it must change. And self-care is an and, it's not an or. In fact, a lot of conflicts are based on people thinking in an or mentality. So we can either have this or we can have that. But actually, often the solution is when you think of and. So if you can remember one thing, remember that if you can think of and, so it is self-care and systems care or systems change. Next slide, please. So what is mindfulness? So, I mean, I'm sure some of you would have come across mindfulness. You may have even practiced meditation and mindfulness. But this is the definition given by John Kabat-Zinn, who was one of the pioneers in the research on mindfulness, which is based on a very, very ancient practice. And it's about awareness. It's about awareness of the present moment. It's about paying attention on purpose, because the mind tends to wander. So you need practice. Somebody talked about atomic habits earlier, I think on Monday. And it's about getting into the habit and practicing paying attention in the moment. But the way to do it is non-judgmentally, because the moment judgment comes in, thoughts start and you start getting drained and you start going down a rabbit hole. And that is not what mindfulness is about. It's also about building in kindness and curiosity, which we will speak about in a minute. And remember that the word is not the thing. So whatever you know about mindfulness or meditation, perhaps putting it aside for the time being would be really helpful. Next slide, please. So mindfulness consists of this triad of intention, which is that perhaps your intention could be that I just wanted to come to this session to be with a sense of awareness. I intend to be aware. It's not a goal. So it's contrary to the goal-oriented way in which we work. It's about intention. It's about setting an intention, and it's about attention, which is a key feature of mindfulness. It's paying attention. And there's a lot of research being done on attention right now. And it's about an attitude. And the attitude is usually one of non-judgment, open awareness, non-judgmental open awareness. And mindfulness comes from a word called sati, which is a Pali word. Pali is an ancient Indian language akin to Sanskrit. And it actually means remembering. It doesn't mean going into some trance-like state. It's about just remembering, to be present, to be awake. Next slide, please. So we are often on autopilot, and autopilot is a great way in which the brain, which is a very energy-hungry organ, wants to create shortcuts. So driving to work, you don't need to actually know step by step what you're going to do to drive to work. Your brain knows what it needs to do. It's on autopilot. But there are some times when you need to drop out of autopilot into being present and aware. And because from a position of being in autopilot, you cannot respond. You tend to react. Next slide, please. So the interest in mindfulness in research terms is absolutely exploded from, let's say, the 2010s right into the 2023. There was a slight dip, but there are lots and lots of articles coming out. There are probably 50 or so pieces of research that are really very, very high quality, well-designed studies that show that mindfulness has at least a moderate benefit for most people. So it wasn't probably not designed to be used in the workplace, but it has got so many applications in life and it is so useful. Next slide, please. So the neuroscience of mindfulness is around the prefrontal cortex and its connections with the amygdala. The amygdala is really the organ where the fight and flight response takes place, and the prefrontal cortex is activated during mindfulness meditation. Next slide, please. It's important to remember what mindfulness isn't. So it isn't a religion. It's not about emptying the mind. It's not a relaxation technique, though it may give rise to relaxation because it's a way of letting go of the past and letting go of the future just for the time that you are actually meditating. But mindfulness is not just meditation. Meditation is just a practice. Mindfulness is what you can do all through the day, and it's compatible with every other coping strategy that you may have. It's not a set of breathing exercises, and it's not a new age hippie practice. In fact, there's a long list of what mindfulness isn't, which is worth recognizing because otherwise, people get the wrong impression about mindfulness. Next slide, please. We know from this study that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So this was a study done with adults in the USA. They were sent messages through an iPhone app to find out what they were actually paying attention to when the message came. And they said 47% of the times their mind was wandering. So you might say, okay, so what? But actually, when their minds were wandering, they were less happy. And that is the key. So if you, and this is an association, of course, it's very difficult to tease out, what is the cause and effect, but there's an association between mind wandering and an unhappy mind. Next slide, please. So the pillars of mindfulness are trust. You've got to trust the process will work for you. Letting go and acceptance are very, very important. Patience. So it's a slow burner. You sow the seed and then you wait for a little while before the first shoots appear. It's non-striving. You're not trying to get anywhere. In fact, you're trying simply to be present. It's non-judgmental awareness, and you approach whatever arises in your consciousness with a beginner's mind. Next slide, please. So the qualities to bring into the practice are curiosity. So what is this that's going on? What am I feeling right now? So just without necessarily wanting an answer. So no conclusions are required. You're just asking questions. Sense of gratitude and a sense of kindness. Next slide, please. So why the breath and why the body? So the body and the breath are always present. The mind is often scattered. It goes into the past with all its regrets, goes into the future with all its anxieties. If you can find 10 minutes in the day where you can be fully present with what's taking place, it might help you to be fully present with whatever else is happening in the rest of the day. Next slide, please. So just a simple exercise now. If you just like to place a hand on your tummy, you may want to close your eyes or keep your eyes open. And with every in-breath, just notice your tummy rising. And with every out-breath, your tummy falling. Just a way of becoming aware of your breath, if that works for you. And you might want to just connect with your feelings by just placing a hand on your heart. And you can do this. It's a very, very self-soothing exercise. Again, plenty of research to support this. So when people do this, there is a rise in oxytocin levels. There is a lot of our emotions and our thoughts are neurochemically transmitted. So that's one way to become aware of your breath. Next slide, please. So we know about the fight and flight reaction. I don't want to dwell on this. This is very, very automatic. This is easy for us because it just happens. You know, you get an email and you get triggered. Next slide, please. And when you get triggered, what happens is that you suffer. And that is the problem. It's the other person, of course, has said something, done something intentionally or unintentionally, or something has happened within the team. Pain is inevitable, so stuff happens, but suffering is optional, so you do have a choice. Next slide, please. So the most important skill, I suppose, to learn, and meditation is a skill, mindfulness is a skill, responding as opposed to reacting is a skill, is to press the pause button. So the most important message, I suppose, from today is to, if you can just remember, so remember the word mindfulness comes from the word remembering, just remember to press pause. And in that pause, you will find a wealth of just, you will know what to do just because you've paused. Next slide, please. So emotions, I mean, you'd probably not be surprised to know that research on emotions has been very, very late in coming. It's taken scientists, neuroscientists, and people working in the field a very long time to even acknowledge that emotions need research or that emotions can be researched because emotions are messy. But emotions are what make us human. And most of the most significant decisions in your life, just think about them, have been emotional and not totally rational. In fact, the rational decisions may not have always worked out for you. The other point is that we are conditioned to hide our emotions and control our emotions, somehow giving people that image that you are tough, that you're stoic, that you can ride the storm. And perhaps it's not very helpful. Your emotions are not you. There's plenty of research again to suggest that we create our emotions through our thinking. And once again, talking about atomic habits, our emotions leads to actions and behaviors that lead to habits. And your body is an early warning system. So we need to learn to listen to our bodies, learn to listen to where that gut feeling is arising and why is it that you're feeling uneasy, not put it away and shun it away. Next slide, please. We talked about emotional intelligence. Again, I just wanted to show this slide to suggest that there are lots of benefits of meditation vis-a-vis emotional intelligence because it leads to less stress and more empathy. Next slide, please. And its links to leadership. So the leadership excellence that has been spoken about today, there are probably more than these 4 qualities, but a leader needs focus, they need creativity, clarity, and compassion, and all these can be enhanced through mindfulness, through less mind wandering, greater presence, having a beginner's mind where you can look at situations and complex problems afresh and anew. Non-judgment is not just about non-judgment towards other people, it's about non-judgment towards yourself as well. And having an approach and not an avoidance type of strategy. And having a culture of kindness in the organization that you work. Next slide, please. So attention, our circuits are overloaded. We are available to people 24/7, 365. And there's a definite well-recognized attention deficit trait among adults nowadays. You know, we walk around with our smartphones. We are not paying attention to the moment most of the time. And there's a myth that we can do it, we can have it all. There's a multitasking myth. Neuroscientific research has shown that we at best can only have continuous partial attention and not multitask. So the other message I would like to give is that there's something called a purposeful pause that can just be 1 or 2 minutes long that you can take several times through the day, where you actually do nothing, literally. You just bring your attention to your feet on the floor, hands on your lap, your body on the chair. Bring your attention to your breath. You may want to close your eyes or even keep your eyes open. This can be done before meetings. This can be done during meetings. Next slide, please. And creating space. You know, when managers and leaders are asked what is it that they would like most, they say it's space. And if you can help find the space for yourself and manage your energy and not your time, as we heard one of the earlier speakers saying, scheduling, deciding what is urgent and what is important. And having a daily meditation practice helps with that. So it can be just 10 minutes out of, your there's 24 hours in the day. If you sleep for 8 hours, then you've got a good duration in the day when you are awake. You can take out 10 minutes out of that and just have a meditation practice, which for a lot of people has been life-changing. Next slide, please. And connecting with other people, thinking before you speak, mindful emailing. My emailing is not simply about writing the email because there's a message you want to send to somebody. It's about writing the email, not sending it, thinking about it, and just thinking about the other person who is going to receive the email. How are they going to receive this email? So listening to yourself both on and off the mat, and that will increase your ability to listen to others. There's again a lot of evolutionary biology evidence to suggest that we are actually, as human beings, hardwired for connection, and it's collaboration that is led to evolution, not simply competition. Next slide, please. So before we do a short practice, I'd just like to say a little bit about compassion. Compassion is just a definition of compassion, because there's lots of confusion about compassion, is that compassion is about recognizing suffering, but not only that, it's about relieving distress. So taking action to relieve distress, and it's not the same as empathy. Empathy is what leads to burnout, because you see suffering, you suffer, there are your mirror neurons that fire, you suffer with your patients, you suffer with your team members. uh, with compassion, you have a possibility of preventing burnout, because you recognize the suffering within yourself and you do something about it to relieve your own suffering and your own distress, and you're much more available, much more present, and much more of a team member and a team player in that way. So your own suffering is a really important focus, and this is a great quote: success is a great place to hide. Next slide, please. So 5 ways to well-being. You may have heard about this. Connect, be active. So connect with other people, have a professional and personal network. These are really positive, supportive strategies that have been well researched. Being active, do anything like, run, go to the gym, yoga, swimming, walking. Take notice. Mindfulness practice will help you take notice. That's the simple things that give you joy. It doesn't have to be on the mat all the time. You just can be present when you're going on a walk, or present when somebody's speaking to you. Keeping on learning something new every time, and giving your time, your words, and your presence. Next slide, please. Coping matrix. I mean, this is something that you can use. So just write down, how do you know when you're managing? What's a good day for you? Next is, what are your early warning signs that you're not coping? Third is, what are your red flag signs? So it could be that your red flag is you've made a drug error, or your warning signs could be you keep developing a headache every day. And what are your coping mechanisms? So people find this a very useful exercise. Next slide, please. And this 3-step breathing space is a great way to, if there is some overwhelm going on in the day, you're really quite scattered, just stop. That's the most important thing. Recognize your automatic pilot, take a pause, gather all those thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations, and then bring all your attention to your breath. No matter how it is, whether it's fast, slow, static, maybe you held your breath, maybe you're sighing, and then do that for about a minute or so, and then let it go, become openly aware to a wider perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so just wanted to check, do we have enough time for a short practice? Because I really wanted to, do a short practice with attendees today.
Yes, we could take a minute if that helps.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I'll just take perhaps a minute or two. Yeah. Okay, so just like to invite you once again to come into presence. So just noticing your body sitting here, feet on the floor, and bringing your attention to your breath. So just the breath coming in and out of the body, perhaps hand on your tummy, hand on your chest, letting your shoulders relax, and just becoming aware of whatever is going on in your mind, emotions, thoughts, without any judgment. And thank you. And next slide, please, just to show you a few resources that you could use. So Fix the Roof when it's sunny. So when things are going well is the time to learn meditation, learn about mindfulness. In a crisis, probably not a very good way to learn. Next slide, please. So Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer, and HM, which is Healthy Minds. These are good apps. Insight Timer is free, so I would recommend that. Next slide, please. And these are the books to read if you're really interested in. So John Kabat-Zinn, Mark Williams, and Shama Shaladina. And there's a lovely book by Janice Marturano about finding the space to lead, which is all based on being a mindful leader. Next slide, please. So audio downloads, if you type in mindfulness audio downloads, there's a Bangor University website. Lots and lots of very, very useful meditation, sitting meditation, body scan, mindful walking, mindful movement. Next slide, please. And you might want to think about, okay, so what? Self-care, mindfulness. So each one of us has to perhaps ask this question to ourselves. So what and now what? Next slide, please. So the most important lesson of the day is you can't pour from an empty cup. So please take care of yourself first. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. That was excellent. There's lots of applause and thumbs up coming in from the chat. So thank you. That was much appreciated. Please do be putting your questions in the question Colin, we do have an excellent question from Shabana. It's got two parts to it. First, I'll ask the first bit. So do you have experience in recommending mindfulness for adolescents with functional neurological disorder you can share? Or generally, is it something you can refer children and families to who you think will benefit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is, it's very, very ad hoc, the availability for mindfulness for children and for adolescents. I think in some areas there are child and adolescent mental health services who do offer this, but usually it's a matter of individual members of staff taking an interest. There's a very good program called Mindfulness in Schools project, which was actually started in America and is now firmly embedded in the UK. I've actually trained as a mindfulness in schools practitioner, and I tried to set up a mindfulness in schools project with one of our local comprehensive schools. We had many, many meetings, and I just got a sense after about 6 months of trying that I couldn't get this embedded into, it has to be embedded into the school curriculum. And I just couldn't achieve that because teachers are so, again, just like doctors, they are so busy. They're so, that their plates are full. So that is perhaps another reason why I think we all need to take that pause and say, why are we so busy? What are we so busy doing? And why are we so busy that we are then building up a whole group of adolescents who are then going to go into life without any focus on the skills around how to look after themselves. And we know that mental health statistics for young people are really going through the roof. So it's a really good question, and I'm afraid we don't have good services around this. But I think schools are probably the best way to introduce it into the community. Sorry, Vicky, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, the second part of the question was just about how you embed that within your team in your clinical practice kind of day to day. Is that something you've managed to work in with your team locally?
Yeah, so again, I really feel really quite sad that I came to mindfulness so late in my career, and I became a teacher just about 5 years, well, actually only a couple of years before I retired, but I became interested in mindfulness just about 5 or 6 years before I retired. I talked a lot about it, tried to introduce it into our pediatric team, not with great success, but what did happen, and whatever I think I have achieved with making people more aware about mindfulness in the hospital and in our local deanery, I think has been a bonus, because when I started out, I said, nobody's going to take me seriously. They think I'm a hippie. They'll think that, I'm bringing some new age wisdom, Eastern wisdom into the West, and maybe he should try and find something else to focus on. I was really surprised that we set up a mindfulness interest group in Rotherham where I work. There were about 10 people in the whole hospital who were interested, who then took those mindfulness practices back to their teams. So there was the Macmillan team, and then there was the heart failure team, and lots of teams in the community wanted me to just give them some kind of orientation. So people did embed it into their teams. And I think before COVID, we ran about 20 taster sessions. During COVID, we ran 8-week courses for I think we ran about 5 8-week courses. So I'm not sure, we don't have any data to support this, but people took the mindfulness approach to their teams. And this was not because of me. This is because just mindfulness has become so available, it's become so accessible, and people are desperate. And I think very encouragingly, people have stopped saying, what is the NHS doing for me? What is the chief executive doing for me? What's the government doing for me? I'm broken. What they're now starting to say, and I must say, this is the young people, the younger crowd are saying, we are going to take it into our own hands. We're going to look after ourselves. So I think that's really encouraging.
Thank you. So I think there are a few other excellent questions in the chat, but I think just in the purposes of time, we should probably move over to our next speaker. Is that right, Richard? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suri.
Thank you.
And so I'd like to introduce our next presenter for this evening. So Professor Julie Uy is Editor-in-Chief for the Journal of Pediatrics and Child Health, which is published on behalf of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians. She is a neonatologist at the Royal Hospital for Women Randwick, conjoint professor at UNSW Sydney, and honorary associate professor at the NHMRC Clinical Trials Centre, University of Sydney. She is also currently visiting professor to the University of Malaya and the Northwest Children's Hospital and University of China. Professor Ui has contributed to state and national guidelines for management of neonatal abstinence syndrome, as well as guidelines for the American Breastfeeding Medical Association for Maternal Health. So, Professor Ui, thank you so much for taking the time out to present this afternoon. I know you're on call, so we appreciate your time.
Right, thank you, Richard. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and I do not look like that picture because I haven't slept for 24 hours. So I wasn't even sure I would make it to this talk. Well, I haven't got any slides because Richard just, gave me this task last week, but he wanted me to talk about the leadership and challenges and possibly the rewards associated with my new role as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Pediatrics and Child Health, which I'll call JPCH. It's the official journal of the Royal College of Physicians, and I took over this role in March this year after a quite tumultuous year for the journal. So it's been around for like 60 years. It's had 7 editors-in-chief who are responsible for the strategic direction of the journal as a voice of the college. And the second to last editor had the job for 15 years. He became ill, and then another editor was appointed very briefly after that for about 6 months, and then I came on the job after. So I guess I'm the first neonatologist, I think, and the first woman and the first person of Asian descent to be the EIC of the JPCH. I realized very quickly that I had quite big shoes to fill. There were a lot of structural changes, and I inherited the journal with a massive backlog of articles to be processed, more than 650. So that's been my homework over the last 3 to 4 months. There were many problems facing the journal. That's not uncommon to modern day journals, especially for those representing a college body. There were challenges of the open access journals, the competition, the predatory journals, and a huge number of, manuscripts that were really, really, below standard. But what my mindset was, what doesn't kill me can only make me stronger. So Richard has asked me to speak about leadership, and I don't think you can be a leader without a team, and you have to make sure that you have the best team. If you don't have a team, you're the single person there. My first task was to make sure I had a strong editorial team. What happened over the last decade or so was that we had a very strong editor-in-chief, and many of the senior editors had their roles diminished. So I had to turn this team into a resilient, motivated, and strong team. And I am very much so the first to acknowledge that I do not have the content expertise to direct research for many of the subspecialties that the general journal covered. I'm a neonatologist. I would not be able to tell what the latest in allergy or cardiology or orthopedics were. So I had to bring in new people, motivated people who were invested in making sure that the scientific excellence of this journal met modern day needs. You have to give your team responsibility, give them some ownership of their tasks. So the people I brought on or the people who remained with me were very, very strong in their ideas of how to make the journal a rewarding process. As a leader, you also need a vision. What do you want the journal to be like in 5, 10 years, 15 years beyond my time? For example, is it the voice of the college or for Australia or New Zealand, or should it be an international journal? I had to ensure scientific excellence. For those of you who have not been editors before, there are many, many submissions now, probably generated by all those AI programs. For example, we found a manuscript that was submitted to 2 journals at the same time, but unluckily for the authors, they copied the same editor for both journals, so they had to be retracted. What I have learned is that leadership is also learning. This was a very new role to me. published quite a few manuscripts before. I've been on editorial boards, but always following someone else. So every step of the way, I was learning. I made a lot of mistakes. I am still making a lot of mistakes, but hopefully I will get better with time. So I do this job, of course, unpaid, on top of the activities that actually keep me fed. But I view this job as a privilege. I'm always learning on the job, I think, learning about how the publications are processed, how we engage the community, and how to ensure that quality science is disseminated and to take leadership to the next level. I have to say that this process, as well as I guess any other activities that involve leadership, will take a lot of your time. I'm lucky that my children are now grown. Almost all of them are out of school, and I would not have been able to do this job if they weren't. A lot of what we do is over and above what we are financially or even professionally recognized for, but that doesn't mean that we are not paid in other ways, including receiving satisfaction in learning, improving ourselves, and um, doing a better job. Really, leaders eat last. If one of your team can't or won't be able to finish a job, you have to do it. And my principle is that as a leader, you need to start from the bottom and make sure you do everything within your responsibility well. Look after your team first and then yourself. But I guess finally, leadership is also leaving a legacy. What is my aim now? What do I want to be known for as the person that brought down the journal or the person that brought it up? As leaders, we need to realize that we're not here forever. The last EIC or the second last EIC was in the role for 15 years. I don't think I'll last that long. My aim is to establish a new generation that will take over from me when I grow too old to even remember how to turn on the computer. So to do this, I need to collaborate and establish a network that will identify the next generation, that will be agile in learning and agile in adapting to the changes. They need to have a vision to sustain the journal for the next maybe 60, 100 years, long after I'm gone. So I guess leadership I don't view as a challenge. It is tough at times, but I see this as an experience to make me grow and to learn. Again, whatever doesn't kill me can only make me stronger, and hopefully I'll pave the way for the next editor-in-chief with a better and more easily navigatable process, if that's even a word, than what I inherited. So I do apologize for the shortness of this talk. I didn't really have much time to prepare for it, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Julie, thank you so much. I loved your talk. Can I ask first question, please, as one of the chairs? There's an interesting power dynamic in academic journals. So you've got reviewers volunteering time, you've got the editors who are aiming to maintain scientific integrity and produce good quality or publish good quality research, but then also the commercial aspect. And publishing is obviously a multi-million-dollar industry and it seems to me profit-driven or profit-motivated. And how do you balance those different perspectives and maintain the goodwill of the community that volunteer a lot of time to review articles, etc.?
Exactly, Richard. Getting people to donate their time for the pursuit of scientific excellence is increasingly tough. Reviewers are very thin on the ground, and so are editors. I know in the adult journal, the International Medical Journal, they took the editor-in-chief about 12 months to find a hematology section editor. A lot of things we do in academia are unfinancially rewarded. So many of us do it because we want to better ourselves academically. there are the difficulties associated with other, with probably the newer journals, especially open access journals that have a lot of financial incentives for publication. They have a lot of carrots. Like, for example, one of the metrics that one of the open access journals has is a turnaround time of 3 days from, acceptance to publication, which is crazy. Yeah. So I think hopefully we have an enough of a big enough body in the scientific community to continue this effort, because I think that's the only way that academia can survive. We cannot pay for scientific excellence.
Thank you. We have got another question from Alicia, actually. So you've talked about part of your role in leadership of finding, the next generation to be able to kind of hand on the baton to after you've left. What steps do you take in trying to kind of find those people, and what do you do in terms of trying to help shape them into what you want to carry forward in the future?
Thanks, Vicky. That's a great question, Elisa, because I think you have to cast the net wide. Often you don't see leadership qualities in people until they're given the challenge, but they must also have the opportunity. So, my belief is that everyone has the potential to be a good leader, but it's whether they have the chance to show their leadership skills. So, to get the new generation, what my principle is to encourage as many of the new upcoming researchers to take on responsibility roles. For example, giving them chances to review or act as associate editors and guide them through the process. This is talking about the journal itself. But in other aspects of life, as you can, for example, you see an emerging clinician, for example, you give them little bits of responsibilities like teaching a child how to walk or to eat on its own, or, not make a mess on the floor. But the most important thing is to give chances and be generous about it, and also to give credit where it's due.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thank you. Do you have any further questions there, Richard?
Yes, there's one other there, and it's a question about the increasing use of AI, Julian, duplicate
Gosh, yes.
submissions or plagiarism, and how do you deal with that, or how do you blacklist those kind of researchers?
Oh, wow. That's a new thing to me. I didn't even know about Chat GPT until last year. My kid told me about it. Look, most of the journals have got AI checkers now, and journals will have different levels where they have, where concern is raised. So if you're above 20% identical or whatever, then it's an automatic rejection, whatever, right? But suddenly it's so clever, it's scary. My goodness. But there is a tone about the publications generated by AI that you can, learn to sniff out. It's just too perfect. And you get a sense of it that it's been written not by your next door human, right? But that is really beyond my expertise. We do have a bunch of young editors that are very keen on AI. So I refer to them as content experts if there's something that I'm suspicious about. Really, it is a challenge for today's academic publications.
Yeah, great, and it's certainly an evolving area, isn't it? That it's constantly changing. So I don't see any other questions online. So again, thank you so much, Professor Uy, for joining at short notice and for your insights. We really appreciate it. And I'd like to finish up today's session by thanking all our participants and everyone for their insightful contributions, comments, and questions. So today we have explored the vital importance of managing ourselves as the foundation for leading others, and I hope you leave this session with new perspectives and practical strategies to implement in your daily practice. Thank you once again for your engagement and dedication to advancing leadership in pediatrics, and I look forward to seeing you on our final conference day this Friday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Vicky.